Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Landlord University podcast. I'm Stephen White, and I'm recording here live from the RentPrep offices in Western New York. And it's been a while since we've been on the podcast. For those of you who have subscribed in the past with Jeff Pearson and I, we took a little hiatus, but we're back, and today it's just going to be me. So we're going to be going over a topic that is very near and dear to me. I talked to a lot of landlords over the past 10 years, and I seem to see this recurring theme among them, and it's bad tenants attract bad landlords, and vice versa. Bad landlords attract bad tenants. So I've come to the conclusion over time that more often than not, the landlords create their own problems. So a lot of times landlords will come to me and say, you know, I've had this issue with a tenant, and they're causing all kinds of problems. And then we start to back up and really look at what happened and right from the beginning of their tenancy, and we can usually track it down to a singular event or something that happened, whether it be the landlord skipped the background check, or the landlord they were flexible on their policy for, charging a late rent fee, or maybe a security deposit, things like that. So a lot of times it could be traced back to the landlord doing something not right, which caused the tenant to then react in a certain way and creates this bad tenant situation. I'm not saying that all landlords create bad tenants, but I think a lot of times landlords open the doors and give tenants that opportunity to take advantage and do things that landlords hate. So what we're going to talk about here real quick, we're just going to go over a couple of things that I think are really important for landlords to understand about how to really be a good landlord. And we're going to be talking more theory and philosophy here, right? The idea of being a good landlord, the idea of what it takes to be someone dependable and trustworthy and come across that way and present yourself that way to a tenant. So, my number one thing, and I get this from the feedback that I've heard from tenants, so directly hearing from tenants, the number one red flag that a good tenant has, that they may not be dealing with a great landlord, is the landlord doesn't return calls promptly. And that's a killer because it's an easy thing to do, but I think a lot of landlords sometimes have this mentality of, you're on my time, I'm busy, they need to understand that, or I've got other things, which all may very well be true, but got to remember at the end of the day, this is a sales pitch in a lot of ways, that you're trying to present well. You're trying to present the apartment well. You're trying to present the unit well. And more often than not, if you're an individual landlord managing these properties, you're trying to present yourself well. So one of the best things you can do is return calls promptly. Makes you look very professional. Use a calendar. Use your phone calendar, an alert or something to let you know, hey, you got to return these calls. Or do what I like to do, which is block out time every day that you would use to catch up on these sort of things. So I usually do it in my second block of the days, my 9 to 10 block. So 8 to 9, everything's catching up, emails, getting back to people, that type of thing. 9 to 10 block is usually returning phone calls. And as a landlord, I think that's pretty key to have that actually scheduled out so that you don't forget it or let it, slide past. The other thing is to be on time for appointments. So kind of in the same way as returning calls promptly, make sure that you show up on time for these appointments. And if for nothing else, you want to get there early to make sure that the place is ready. You don't want to show up, and if the place is vacant, you want to have time to sort of get things ready, put things where they should go if anything's out of place. If you have tenants there and this was a scheduled showing or an appointment, you want to make sure that you let the existing tenants know, hey, I'm going to be dropping by. Again, stop in early. Try to let them know ahead of time, hey, try to make the place presentable. I'm going to be here around noon or whatever. And then, like I said, stop in a little bit early so that you can make sure that it's ready and so that you get a good showing in there too. Okay. Next tip would be have procedures as a landlord and follow them. This is huge. This is key. I couldn't tell you how many times I've had this conversation with landlords where they tell me, I've had this terrible tenant and I trusted my gut. I never ended up going with a background check. Or this is a classic one too that I hear a lot of. They told me that they needed some additional time to get the security deposit together. So I bent the rules for them. I gave them a little bit of time. And then inevitably they end up with the situation where, they never got the full thing, or let's say they do it, but now you've already kind of created that bad habit. And so now you're hearing stories like, they lost their job. I let them slide on the late fees once or twice, and now it seems to be happening all the time. It is super important as a landlord that you have policies, you have procedures, and you stick to them. They're meant to be followed, not broken. And especially when it comes time dealing with a potential tenant and they want to bend certain rules like the security deposit. If they don't have that security deposit going into the situation, they're not prepared. Plain and simple. They're not ready to rent from you. And you need to stick to your policy and say, no, this is what we are expecting or what we're looking for. Let us know when you can either meet that or when you're ready to, when you've saved all that money, but we're not going to make an exception here. Trust me, landlords, you're not going to come off as the bad guy. A lot of landlords have that fear. They don't want to be the bad guy, but you're not making friends here. And it doesn't mean you have to be a jerk. It doesn't mean you have to be the world's angriest landlord and have that impression, but you don't want to be walked on either. And that's the worst thing for landlords. They feel like they're being walked on and taken advantage of. And like I said, it usually starts with some kind gesture that unfortunately escalates into just outright abuse. So another tip that I like to throw out here, using professional forms. This is huge. I couldn't tell you how many landlords submit rental applications to us and they're handmade. And I mean that not that they're handmade typed on a Word document. I mean literally drawn with pen and a paper and handmade, and the lines and everything to fill in their name. Don't do this. You look insane. There are so many places where you can get free forms, RentPrep being one of them. But there's so many places you can get free forms, or take a minute to create one if you feel so inclined. But do not handwrite these things out. And if you create it, make sure you're doing it correctly. The worst thing is to come back to an applicant and say, man, you know what? My application was missing some information. Can you give me this additional stuff? Again, it's going against that idea of looking professional, looking put together. I mean, even if this is your first time doing it, don't come across that way. Look like you've done this a bunch of times. Give those people some confidence. Again, I can't reiterate enough that good tenants look for good landlords. So this is a huge key into finding those right tenants. A bad tenant is going to be looking to take, an opportunistic chance. They're looking for that right moment to say, oh my God, this landlord doesn't know what he's doing. Trust me, this happens every single day. I see landlords fall into this trap. And again, having that polished look, I think a lot of times start with using the right forms and using the correct paperwork, really. Okay. Last tip for being a good tenant, or a good landlord rather, and attracting good tenants is to use productive communication. Anybody that sat through our webinar last week that we did, we had a really, really funny example. Funny for us watching, not funny for the landlord who unknowingly did this. He put a note on the tenant's door that said, I'm going to be stopping by later to work on your windows outside, and close your blinds because I'm a peeping Tom. Now, it was meant to be a joke, and I get that, but tenants don't always take it that way, and you don't know when you might catch that tenant in the wrong mood. You may have had, some funny banter back and forth, and you thought it would go over really well, but trust me, avoid these urges to try to be funny, or especially in writing. Don't ever do that in writing. I don't know, this was a Facebook post that went viral, so I don't know necessarily that the landlord had any poor repercussions, but even on the Facebook post that went viral, the tenant said, "Can you believe that my landlord wrote this?" So again, perfect example. The landlord thought he was being funny, thought he was being relatable, trying to make a joke, and it just went out the wrong way. So use productive communication. Be careful what you put in writing. Only address issues that are at hand. In other words, you don't want to take an opportunity that you're speaking with a tenant to now hit them with everything that you hate about them, or everything that rubs you the wrong way, over their past year of tenancy. You want to make sure that, that your communication is thoughtful and productive. You're achieving the goal that you want out of it. If it's a late rent issue, address the late rent issue separately from them parking in a spot they're not supposed to. Everything should be addressed purposely, productively, and, professionally. Again, that's where these forums and things like that come into play. So just a couple of quick tips, again, to help landlords be better landlords. So we'll run through them. Return calls promptly, be on time for appointments, have procedures and policies and follow them. That's the key part there. Use professional forms and use productive communication. Make sure that you're communicating well. That's what your job as a landlord is to manage these properties, and that means managing people. So, all right, landlords, that does it for this episode of Landlord University podcast, and I hope to see you guys back. We're going to be doing these more often, again, for those subscribers and those of you who have listened the first time around and have been asking me, when is it coming back? We're doing it now, so just stay tuned, and format might change here or there, but we're still committed to really just providing landlords the best content and sharing everything that we're hearing from landlords. We've got our fingers on the pulse here at RentPrep, so stay tuned and keep learning.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides.